Testing.
Can you hear me?
I can. Yep.
Okay, so I'm kind of cutting in and out, but so our camp has a big warehouse, and in a big warehouse, you can fit a lot of stuff over many years. Our divisional headquarters has a lot of things, and so does all the other Salvation Armies in our division. So we all have a lot of resources that we have excess of, but we don't have a good communication of who needs what resources. They don't know that there's out there, so they can't ever request them. So I kind of am trying to work with our operations person at DHQ, Dan Barnhill, and trying to make him aware of what we have excess of or what we have need of. And then as he hears from the different divisions, he's kind of spreading the word as he goes to and fro of who has what and where. So in one instance, I said that we had lots of folding chairs that were almost like brand new, and we hadn't used them for 5 years. So then April was here, and she helped us load Lieutenant Sarah Eddy in Canton, who needed new folding chairs for her chapel. So that was an example of resources shared, maybe a silo busted.
Now, is this a standing, is there a way that people can get more information about this built in now, or is it still, April shaking her head, no, there's nothing standing. So how's that work, Jay? Is it possible? Because you had talked about something about establishing some process where you could make people aware of the inventory.
Yeah, so Dan Barnhill was the one that said we should develop something, and then I emailed like our homework was, and he said that might be challenging. So it was his idea, but then he kind of like sidestepped me when I tried to go into the idea. So we'll see.
April, what's your take on all that? April, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Oh, you have to be careful.
What's my take? I was trying to delay having to go back to work, so I just stopped and helped them load chairs.
That was nice. It was a photo op for you. Looking like you cared.
I did care.
Jay, one question on this. When you discovered that Dan didn't want to follow through, were you, is it a situation that matters outside of an assignment? Is it a situation that matters organizationally? In other words, is it something that would actually benefit the organization in any practical way if it were in place?
Oh yeah, it would be huge.
Pete, can you hear us? Oh,
yeah, I can hear everything. I think my video feed's in and out though.
Okay, that's all right.
You got some extreme weather coming in. So.
Stay with us. So it would be huge, but it's not. Are there barriers that are, too much of a hassle to try and overcome to make it happen? Well, wait a minute. Why would it be huge?
Well, I think it would be huge because Salvation Army is a big recipient of a lot of different things and resources, and unfortunately a supplier would give one place a whole bunch of stuff that they can't even use all of, so that if we can share the wealth and it gets throughout the division with divisional people going to the different corps. I mean, even Salvation Army officers go to the different corps to fill in on any given Sunday, so they could take a load of something, or if Dan goes somewhere, he could take something and maybe have like a centralized form or like something on the iDrive of something that you could check a database and see if anybody has an excess of this, that, and the other.
So in the pre-work for this particular assignment, we referenced something that April brought up. She asked a question about useful bonds or useless bonds, because McChrystal in his book, she liked umbilical cords, which I think is really helpful. Actually, if I gave birth, I'd be thinking about that type of thing a lot myself. But McChrystal said we were failing to create useful bonds between one team and the next. So this is potentially an example of that. And in attempting to answer April's question, one of the things that occurred to me, actually, it's in some ways it's easier to think of useless bonds, and I think of that as relationships in name only, going through the motions, And in any organization, understood, we have to pick and choose who we're going to give our time to, and generally we're going to give our time to people who take us seriously, and then we have things that are useless that we have to go through the motions. And if we're going to build on a situation like you're talking about, Jay or Connie or Heath. Heath, are you still with us? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. I'm here.
Can you share the story about your reaching out to the person that you needed to? Can you remember the story, Heath, that you worked on the silo busting?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think you're referencing the communication preference. Is that what you're referring to, Jim?
Yeah.
So, just because I have so many times where I'm out of the building, I rely heavily upon email. And for the last year and a half, I've been emailing someone who I just assume ignored them. And with just a simple question of asking that person how they preferred communication, and they said they're not real good, strong computer skills, their preference is a phone call. It just took our relationship to, I'm no longer frustrated because I'm assuming she's not answering them, and they're not frustrated because they're assuming I'm not communicating with them. We have the preferred method, and it allows us to make sure that we can touch base and provide the programs, importantly, to those that we serve.
And how did that benefit you and your organization?
Well, personally, it alleviated the personal frustration I felt, and even some of the animosity that I was starting to build up for this person that I have to see every single week, and I'm thinking they just ignore me. This is frustrating. So it tore that down instantly, and then we were able to give and deliver better services. We're planning ahead, so we have an event coming up tonight, quite frankly. And if I had done that in email, there would have been no chance that it would be successful because I would be sitting here waiting for that response. But now, because it's on the phone, and at times now in person, we're able to do that with a better delivery of services.
Right. So these are very, practical. I think one of the things you need to understand about the way that I view leadership development is in the context of where you work. I don't view leadership development solely as an individual out there operating in the world, and I become a great leader and people, follow me. To me, leadership happens in a context. And so the reason we're talking on this level, sort of this more granular level, and we're going to, and the reason we deal with things called exercises is because they evoke these kinds of opportunities that are very practical, like whether it's Connie putting up a calendar, for someone to see so that they don't stack the chairs on the table, they put them against the wall. Those things, when they're not paid attention to, tend to, like Heath just referred to, tend to degrade a relationship. So and Heath, we can all relate, we just presume the person's not responding to our method of communication, then there's some personal issue going on between us, when in fact, while it may be bigger of them to kind of inquire to us, generally people won't do that. We have to take the initiative and find out what's going on. It turns out it's a practical problem, not a personal problem. And so, Jay, like the situation you have with the opportunity to actually probably save money for other sections, other core, because they know where to find resources instead of allocating it somewhere else, it becomes very practical. But it's a matter of taking a step and asking and making the connection firmer. So the main thing I wanted to address today was this idea of strengthening these connections when they happen, and building off of them, rather than just being kind of a one-off experience. So like we had this interesting silo busting thing. I want to build off of it, and it's going to be very grounded and practical. So I want to talk about useless bonds for just a minute, because actually Elaine and I met probably 20 years ago when we both worked for a large church, and super large, and it was my first experience in a corporate environment. I've operated solely as a church planter and a kind of a independent agent in most of my life, but for this one brief 2-year period, I parachuted into this large organization to do leadership development and evangelism, and in that context, I was asked to, basically the things that we're talking about here, I was prepared to help in that church 20 years ago, but it was just not going to go down because it was too practical, frankly. And in that environment, I did my first experience of going to meetings that were meaningless, having people say things they didn't actually mean. Accountability was in name only, honestly. Meaning, and I don't mean that like morally, I just mean like even somebody responsibly checking if I was doing my work. It just was. It just wasn't built in. It wasn't baked into the system. And that's what triggered my curiosity about the whole idea of creating a system that has a sense of responsibility, which I prefer over accountability, a sense of responsibility. What does it look like? And so that was my experience with useless bonds. I'm curious, just, I don't want to spend the majority of the time on this, but if anyone else here has had an experience like that, where you realized, I just have to go through the motions. I just have to have a relationship in name only. And it turned out to be, it was not helpful to me or the organization in my experience. Anybody else have an experience like that they'd like to share?
I have one I would share. Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Thumbs
Okay.
up. Thumbs up, Jay.
Sometimes I go to a church that I really like. It's a non-denominational church, and it was a church plant, and now it's in its 5th year, and it's doing really well and growing. But sometimes it frustrates me that it appears like church on Sunday that everybody like remembers you and everybody likes you and they really want you to keep volunteering for them and they want you to do this or that. And then one thing I can't stand is if somebody acts really excited to see me and then I start talking with them and their eyes wander to the next person and they're like saying hi to them while I'm like having a one-way conversation, and then it's like I would prefer just not to have that interaction.
What'd you say, Jay? I wasn't listening.
No, the reason, by the way, to your point, Jay, even though this is a hassle to create this video conferencing thing, I have a saying, FaceTime trumps Facebook every day.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can replace. And though this is not ideal, at least we get to make eye contact. At least we get to watch. And one of the interesting thing about him, Crystal's book, is that he convened a meeting 6 days a week for 7,000 people, and it was an obligatory meeting for 2 hours every morning, and he would be on the call, but he would rarely speak. All they could do was see his face and see if he was paying attention and not wandering off looking at something else. So the part of the reason, to your point, that I prefer this, even though it only mimics, personal contact, is because we get some benefit, some attempt to actually see each other. And that's how we signal each other as well. So Jay, this is your experience in the church, and you view that as you would call that a useless bond at this point.
At times, at the least, but then, I mean, I don't know. It kind of seems like once in a while, like, oh, well, because I had to step down how much I was like volunteering, and then it seemed like my relationship with them in their eyes became less important.
Anybody else have an experience like that?
I think on a smaller level, but to me, it's a useless bond is the water cooler individuals at any type of business, but even the Salvation Army is full of individuals that like to talk. And it's like, I just don't have time for that. Number one, I don't have time for that.
Number one.
But, but I don't, it's just not in my best interest or anybody else's best interest. Right, Jay? But, it's just, that's a useless bond, because it's like, stop spreading unnecessary rumors or stories or whatever.
Okay. So one of the other, just to flip it more positively, one of the other things that on the pre-work that I gave you to read about, well, I think, by the way, that's important to discuss, to be able to acknowledge what it is that's not working for us, why it feels empty, why it feels, you could say inefficient, but it's even, this is why I say we don't need human resources, we need humane resources, because we're people, we're human beings, and we don't actually check our humanity at the door, and so we notice this kind of stuff. So part of leading is owning the fact that, like, oh, I'm dealing with actual human beings, other people who care. So like Jay, people tend to remember if they're not performing correctly, and then you lose interest in them, just like you would. People tend to notice that about us, and so that's why we have to have some sense of, that's why I'm trying to cover this. But one of the other things that McChrystal said was no single supervisor had planned or even dictated an operation in real time. The solution emerged from a dense knot of interactions on the ground level. So this term, dense knot of interactions, this book is very, if you've not read Team of Teams, he uses language like this. So it's pretty intensive reading, and it's military speak and corporate speak, but it's really one of the best books I've read to identify a sense of urgency. What happens when there's a sense of urgency and actual mission going on. So when I was reading this term, dense knot of interactions, it made me think about teams I've been on. And sometimes it's made me think about, like, one other person I've worked with or situations that I've been in. I'm curious about, I'd like to hear about maybe the best team experience you can recall. It can be, an experience you had either with one person or a group of people. It could be, for me, some of my best experiences like this, what I consider a dense knot, is when I played in bands. I'm a musician, and there's been times, in fact, I was with a friend of mine who's a drummer the other day, and we went together to Mexico in 1964. I'm sorry, 65, 66. And they thought we were the Beatles because we had long hair, right? And so that was the most famous they ever got. So, so we were there, and he and I, shared these memories together because we played together. And he still thinks I'm a great bass player and singer, which I'm not. But in his mind, I'm stuck in the past. But that's that was a very memorable, intense time for me. That just, it's very sticky, and I sort of build a lot of my expectations over the years off, like, that sense of closeness. Have you guys had that kind of closeness in another experience where you can recall? It can be, it doesn't have to be, it can be temporary, just an ad hoc kind of experience. But I'm curious about it, what you consider great, where you were in that kind of intensity, you worked with people in that setting.
I'll share one. This is Heath speaking. It actually kind of started with a negative aspect. We were in a small town in northern Michigan, had a large senior citizen group we called the Golden Agers, and they really ran a great program within the Salvation Army. But over the years, there was a sense of disconnect with the Salvation Army. Those silos were coming up and really kind of ran independently. And by the time my wife and I were appointed there, a lot of hurt feelings, to the point where we were just talking about this earlier, where they took funds out of their account and just moved it, which couldn't do with Army policy. And we kind of had this sit down, difficult conversation. But after that, they became our greatest advocates. They volunteered. They owned our commodity food distribution. My wife and I made it a point to, when they had their the color tours or any event that they went to, we went to, so it wasn't just a one-way relationship. So the group I would say was most difficult, had the point of greatest crisis when we went there, was probably our strongest bond by the time we left, and where we made the strongest connection with people. But it had to happen through that difficulty. I don't think it would have been there if we didn't go through that moment of crisis.
Do you think that is a characteristic of a close team experience that you necessarily will go through crisis and challenges together?
My experience is those that you do grow strongest with is you have faced some type of large project that has forced you to do that, or you have had some adversity or crisis that you've had to gone through. Yeah.
Sam, you must have had multiple experiences of this with the teams that you have to deploy. Or
He is a crisis.
Mr. Crisis. Hey, listen, stick with the plan here, Jay. Would you please? It's hard enough. It's hard enough to act.
I'm not going to let you have those turkeys now, Jay.
He is.
I'll just cut his mic off.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay. No, he's unstable.
Yeah, we all are. I was just thinking, and I think Rich is still on here someplace.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
But I was thinking of the 2013 tornado, Rich, where at that time in the Heartland Division, the disaster services was probably non-existent. And we had to bring people in. Rich and I were a part of this team, had a F4 tornado that hit Washington, Illinois. And we had to bring people in from our territorial headquarters from all over the Midwest. And we just came together and bonded almost immediately over this crisis. And we have new friends now from that locally, in the territory, but we've made new emergency manager friends in what we call the Tri-County. It was a good thing for us. Everyone come together. They didn't know who we are, but for a common goal, we came together and made it happen. It was a good thing for us.
So Sam, I read a leadership book a number of years ago called Breakthrough Project, and it was based on the premise that human beings, when there's a crisis, can perform at a very high level. And the guy's question was, is it possible to transfer that into a working situation, right? And it's an interesting question because one of the answers would be no, because human beings are wired to react to a crisis and all of that. But it was, on the other hand, it was like, why can't we? What is it about us that limits us from functioning or applying some of those same elements? Maybe not the crisis, but the same elements in our workaday life, right? What is it that what's your thoughts on that? What's the challenges on translating that into our workaday life?
And I think this would be open to anybody, but I think this is, we in disaster services, we try to move that into our everyday life, so that not every movement that we make is like a disaster, but that we're prepped, we're prepared, and we plan, and so that we don't ever get caught like that again, where we'll need, not that we don't need the help of others, we want the help of others, but we want to be prepared right where we're at. So we live like that all the time. Let's bring us all together. Let's get us together, and let's be on high energy. It can stress us out sometimes, but sometimes you have to have that in the emergency area.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on this? Want to share?
Elaine, and the two experiences that I can recall of working on a team that was like a well-oiled machine, that we all came together. The two of them, to me, have commonalities. The first one was when I was at the Vineyard and running the church bookstore. Becky, Doug, and I were the paid staff, and we usually had a fourth person. That person was gone, and the three of us sat down and talked about what had to be done to keep the bookstore running in a proper way. And we identified what areas were important to us, and each of us moved in that area and did that thing, and we each trusted that the other person was taking care of it. And it just, in in group dynamics, there's forming, storming, and performing. We moved into performing, and we maintained that at a very high level for an extended period of time. But I think the key was clear communication, talking about what we thought we were good about, and trust among each other. So in a small group, when we do a design team meeting, we have space for people to talk about what's important to them, what their doubts are, what their concerns are, and we build safety and trust. And then when it's time to say, okay, we've got this event coming, who's doing this, who's doing that? And I've had people that attend the design meetings say, how do you do this? Because you didn't vote, but you made decisions. You have people filling positions, but you didn't, you didn't intervene and tell them what they're going to do. And the big fruit of all of that, besides us being able to plan and build the whole team that would the day of the event show up, when people showed up that day of the event, there was a different level of ownership. And again, we moved like a well-oiled machine. We were in what they call flow. And both of those, I think, were built on clear communication, listening to what was important to each of the members, and then trusting each other. Okay. And stepping in when somebody had a health issue that they couldn't come. We all just stepped into it and filled the gap when they weren't there. And that was, none of those were emergency situations.
Right, right. Somebody else have a story? See, I think what Elaine is sharing, someone else can cut in on me here if you want to, but what Elaine is sharing, what Sam is sharing, what's interesting is identifying the elements that tend to cultivate that sense of team and closeness. And then as leaders, our job is to one of the best examples I've heard from a guy, so it's one of the more like midwives. I've not been a midwife, so forgive me, but we mostly watch and try and see, and attend. Another example is a guy that was a movie director and our band leader, orchestras. What are they really doing with the baton up there? Most of us like, do you need to be there? Well, and it turns out they do need to be there. But a lot of times what our actual role is as conveners, we're convening something. And then essentially what we do once we convene it is we watch. And then if we have something we can add, we add it. But we don't have to be the person that everybody's just sitting there listening to. So convening becomes a powerful element of developing teams, a sense of teamness. Anybody else have a story they want to tell about this? A great team experience that you recall?
I would say, Dr. Jim, with the counseling that I do, you really notice that you brought up the military earlier. A lot of people, when they go to a deployment, there's good deployments and bad deployments, but it's under such a high stress and they have such a high intimacy with each other that I think sometimes that is the difficulty transitioning back into the population, because you're used to having such a high quality relationship with a select group of people that are now dispersed throughout the US and you don't see them as much anymore. So it's almost like a drug addict having to be sober again, because I think meaningful relationships, at least in my life, a lot of the time, outside of like your family, your own little silo, I think are relatively poor most of the time. There's not a whole lot of people that, if something happened, they would hop right up and help you.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Rich, what are you thinking about when you hear all this?
Well, I agree with Sam. I think a lot of times disaster type of things, you either come together and you succeed, or it becomes its own intimate little disaster. I see people from EDS situations I've worked on in the past that still you can relate to, whether they're from Hurricane Katrina. I saw Major Joe Wheeler here at DHQ just a little bit ago, and it kind of just puts you back in that mindset right away of why we clicked, what worked, what didn't work, and I think those are always a sense of situation, maybe even like Jay said, that even after you disperse, you can still kind of relate to that. And to me, I've tried to use some of those EDS situations to come to bear just in a regular situation. You know, I think the meaningful relationships that I've had at work are those group ones that then melt down into a single one-on-one situation that you can kind of call back, recall what worked here, and how can I apply it to a one-on-one situation.
Great.
Have you seen, Dr. Jim, have you seen, is this a bigger problem in the North America or the U.S. Society than it is like from other societies that are more communal?
Well, that's a great very thoughtful question, and I'll attempt to respond to it. I've had the benefit of living in, India and China and different places. And of course, when you do that this is just for a few months at a time, but we lived with people locally. So as a result of that, you get exposed to their culture. And of course, in those cultures, there's a kind of a institutionalized closeness. It isn't necessarily true, what we would consider closeness. But people find, some of you guys have probably traveled and know this part, but it's built in. That's why they can do something like an arranged marriage, and it works, because they know people and people know them, and they're all committed, and all that stuff goes on. So I think that gives other cultures a more normative sense of closeness. They have their own problems. I mean, one of the things, they're saying what you're good at is what you're bad at. And the United States is essentially a long-term experiment in individualism. We're about 250 years old. We're very young as it relates, historically speaking. I mean, we're on the bubble. Remember that Greece and Rome lasted 1,000 years, and we're like only 250 years in as an organized entity, and we have a lot of stuff, baggage that we've carried in. So all that to say, we're like the first experiment in history on the limits of individualism. So we inherit that. The upside is that it enables us to think the way we think about leadership and being more assertive, et cetera. And so that can benefit people. But the downside is that we are slow on the uptake as it relates to communal life, because it's been pretty fractured, to be honest, and many of us, we could tell stories on our own families and all of that created all that. So without question, Jay, we have the benefit of being able to talk about this and think about it and intellectualize it, at least. The downside is that we are incredibly individualized, and we celebrate the rugged individual over the group. And now that's playing out, of course, in our broader culture now. So yeah, it's a challenge for us. It's the one that we, thank God we were born into it, I guess, instead of a worst case scenario. So I want to just transition here as we bring this in for landing. I want to talk about the assignments coming up, and what we're going to be doing again this month is do a 3-day intensive. So next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday's reflection. But basically the first 3 days, rather than spreading it out over the month, I want to try
Monday's a holiday.
Monday's a holiday. Take Monday off. Start Tuesday, Wednesday. Thank you so much. Thank you, April. I forgot, because I don't get a holiday. I'm just saying.
I don't even.
Okay, well, whatever.
Entrepreneurs never get a holiday.
No, they don't.
I'm never doing that.
Start on Tuesday. But the point here is, again, the purpose of this design is to bring in practical, simple exercises you can implement in the context of your work. And they can be done quickly, they can be done privately, they can be done anonymously, but you have to be conscious that you're doing it. So the 3 exercises we're going to focus on next week, starting on Tuesday, will be asking, and then the second one will be about technology. I'll talk about that. The third one will be called shipping. and then Thursday is reflect. So this is all in the post Zoom call information you've received. And Elaine, interrupt me if I'm speaking out of school here or something, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So I just want to emphasize this first one on asking, because I want to say this, that this exercise on asking, in terms of sort of the magic sauce of Leadership Lab, this will end up potentially being the most important thing you take away from this entire course. It's central to skill building in the work that we do. So I want to say this about, you're going to be, when I say asking, I mean it's the skill of asking how, what, or for. Now, I never leave a meeting. I personally don't ever leave a meeting without asking how, what, or for. Some people don't know I'm doing it when I'm doing it, but just professionally and personally, I don't exit a meeting, whether it's over the phone, whether it's in person, without asking person a how question, such as, I can ask, how are you, okay? Now, if I'm talking with someone who has a great deal of power and influence, and I want that influence or power, you know, I don't start with asking them to give me that influence or power or money. I start with asking them a question like, how are you? How's your family? How are your kids? How did you get so smart? How did you know that? Okay? You ask how questions. Number one, that's level one. The second, these are the on-ramps into influence. And I'm going to talk about that'll be another lab. But the second level question is asking what? What is it that I need? What should I be reading? So, you know, if I'm with someone that I'm impressed with, they're smart, they're insightful, they're caring, they're loving, and I'd like to be more like them, I'll ask them a question like, what is it that I need to know to be more like you? What is it that I should read? What did you do, you know, in your life when you're at my age or when you're at this point in your life? The last question I ask is for, because the for is the hardest to ask. April will know all about this being in development. That is, I'm asking for their time or their money or their influence. And in order to ask for those things, I have to have some level of relationship, urgency, or danger, okay? And the best one is to have built some trust with them, either because of my brand, my association, or because of our personal relationship. So the first thing you're going to do on Tuesday is practice this asking how, what, or for. I want to tell you something. I was born with a disability in that I wasn't famous, okay? And I aspired to have influence, but I didn't have any fame. Nobody was, I could never grow a church large. In the circles I was in, that was the only status, the only way you got status was to grow a big church. People come to it, then the other pastors tell each other, how big is your church, blah, 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 and then you're cool. And then you get to write a book, right, about your success, and then other people come and hear you talk about it. Most of them, of course, are failing at it. And then they go away feeling bad, but you feel good, and you got the money and all of that. So all of that system is just replicates itself in different corporate environments. The church has its own version of this, where we measure things. So what I had the internet. And so fortunately, the internet got invented about the time I was starting to care about these things, and I started writing. And I met some people who had more influence than I did. And I asked them, how do you write? What are you doing? Because I never thought about writing a book. It turns out now I've written 8 books. I ended up I'm just telling you things that happened to me, not because, because I'm really interested in the role of influence in life. And I'm going to talk about that in another lab. But it's a spiritual practice, actually. You have to be very careful and aware of it. But it's very real, and I'm very interested in it. And so I got to write a book, and then I never thought I'd write another one. I ended up writing more books, etc. And then I ended up getting on national media. I ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for a story I did. I ended up making extra money, like up to $100,000 extra income. I still work and have other things I do, but this is just money over time that came to me primarily because I learned how to ask. And I kept asking people to help me, to teach me, to instruct me, to help me, to edit me, to advise me. I just kept asking, and I keep asking. I don't stop asking. I'm just saying all of that to say, you know, asking is so central to developing yourself as a leader. Listen, you will never be able to lead anyone far than you've led yourself. Okay? we're our first audience. We have to lead ourselves, and that's the work we do if we want to give others. So I would have no credibility talking to you about this if I myself hadn't tried this and done this myself, and continue to do it to this day. So asking is the first thing, and you can read the assignment. The second one is tech. Now I have this saying that distribution trumps ideas. Bad ideas get to market every day. And so it's really more important how an idea gets to market than the idea itself, which is a terrible thing to have to admit, but because we all have great ideas. But Heath, when you told me the story about inquiring about how someone preferred to use technology and it's solving a problem for you, that's right in the bullseye of what I'm doing. So one of the assignments is for you to inquire with people what their preferred technology is, just like Keith did. It turns out the person didn't want to use email, they didn't want to use the phone, whichever it was. They wanted to use another methodology. So you're simply going to ask somebody or your team, and you're going to inquire what technology, because people have preferences. And that's another assignment. And it may seem like mundane, but like in Keith's case, it led to an improved relationship and beneficial outcomes to the organization. The third assignment is called shipping. Steve Jobs, who created Apple, said real artists ship. And so shipping means we don't just talk about things, we deliver things. This is going to be an exercise in under-promising and over-delivering. Listen, there's this thing called negative space. Like behind me is this green wall, and it's all a field of green behind me. And the only reason I stand out is because I'm wearing something gray. So the green behind me is negative space in terms of art talk, art speak. It's negative space. And I'm using that. So if there was gray behind me and all it was gray, I'd just be a blob of gray. But I stand out. And so when it comes to shipping, most people don't ship, right? Most people don't keep their word. Most people don't deliver. And organizations allow this to happen. They allow it to happen because it's easier to not hold people responsible for the things they do, even small things. So Connie, when you said you put up a calendar for people, on the wall that are stacking the chairs incorrectly, what you were doing was giving them an opportunity to actually deliver. You were specific with them, you called for a specific kind of behavior, they responded to it, and you gave them a way to that behavior that you wanted them to do. That's called shipping. You delivered a methodology. You didn't just say, hey, it'd be helpful if you guys did this. You said, here's a piece of paper, this is what we want to do, and then you reinforced it. And so that's what I'm talking about. We have little things. I'm not talking about big things. I'm talking about little things where we give people a way to succeed. And so because, I told my kids when they were younger and about work, I said, I don't know what kind of work you're going to do, but if you show up and do what you say you're going to do, you will stand out. It really doesn't matter, actually. It literally doesn't matter if you're a rocket scientist or you're doing something manual labor. I'm not kidding. If you just show up and do what you said you're going to do, you will probably never be out of work. You probably won't. Because the majority of people, the negative space that's operating behind you is people aren't delivering. So just learning how to ship is the third and important piece of the assignment. And then, so each day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, take Monday off to celebrate Memorial Day. Each day, and by the way, if you're like me, some things will converge. You can put them together. I don't care. You can do it what's called asymmetrically. If you have two things that converge, take credit, go for it. Just write them up so that I know you actually thought about it and you were reflecting on it and you knew that you were doing it. And then on Thursday, what I want you to do is I want you to write just about how this exercise has benefited you or the organization. And essentially that's it. If there's stories that emerge out of that, I will interact with you during that time. And I may say to you, okay, there's this thing called After the Lab. Let's go in there and start talking more about it. And if people are interested, they can come there. So those are the three exercises next week. Tuesday is asking. Wednesday is technology, asking. First one's asking, And the second one is technology, focusing on what technology people prefer. And the third one is shipping, actually delivering something that you told somebody you do. And even if they don't know about it or you know about it, and you want to share that story with us. So those are the three things. And on Thursday, write a reflection about that. Okay.
So will you have more information about details? Like, are you supposed to have multiple choice on the choices of technology? Or like, if you asked me that question right now, I couldn't answer it. Like,
I know, but that's because you like to think about things.
That's because it depends. If it's a report, I want it emailed. If it's a decision to be made, I want to communicate by phone or in person. If it's so, there's multiple answers to that.
So on the post-work assignment is more detail about what we mean by this. It may not satisfy your level of question. You can always email me and ask April. It's fine. I like that you think about it. Believe me. But there's no kind of right answer. This is you thinking about, like I would think about someone that I'm working with, like I work a lot with Elaine, and maybe I've forgotten to ask her, because here's the deal. Ask somebody that doesn't have power over you. Ask someone that reports to you or that is dependent on you.
What if you've asked this before, they've told you, but it doesn't seem like the right answer? Like they don't actually use that. Wow.
Go to another person.
Well, that would be an accountability issue, wouldn't it? Be going back to them and said, I'm trying to improve communication, and you told me this is your preference. It doesn't seem to be happening. What else do we need?
Yeah, that's a great, exactly. That's a great.
Or they like email because they can pick and choose and respond when they like to read it, but they don't necessarily. So is it communication to them or from them?
So you can decide, April, about the nature of the relationship and how you use technology in that relationship. Elaine and I use technology all the time. Right. So I have to be talking with her like, she and I message each other 5 different ways. So we have to be in communication about, how do we talk with each other? And as we've gotten more virtual, this is more of a real thing. And so you will need to either do what Elaine said and go back and clarify with someone, is this your preference, or because I noticed you're not following through that way, or you may need to say that won't work because of the nature of our relationship and the kind of work we're doing. We're going to have to still stick with a different platform. So I don't know, but it's at least asking.
So the question is based on a two-way communication, not just how do they like getting it.
It could be that, or how do they like to receive it. April, if I was working with someone and they were doing extension, remote work for me, and I didn't have a lot of contact with them, but it was important what they did, I would want to know which path. Like I talk to people in India, they want to talk on WhatsApp, right? WhatsApp, is like, I don't like dealing with WhatsApp. Okay, it's like the rest of the world operates on WhatsApp. That's why Facebook bought it. Right. It's common. It's more common than what we're doing now. Yeah. You can even do video on WhatsApp. It's very robust. And so I want to help that person. So I'm thinking primarily, initially, people I want to help. I want to find out their preference, like Heath did with the person in his office that wanted a different form of communication. That's all I got. Any other questions?
Well, yeah, but
I understand. Well, okay, you can bring those to me. Just email it to the entire group, and then we'll wait for reply all, because we're going to
crowd. I'll stay on after the call. We can talk.
We're going to crowdsource. Yeah, anyway, time is almost up. We got 2 minutes. Any other questions about the process, or anybody? Okay, Ken Lloyd, can you hear me?
He's muted.
You're muted. You unmute him?
I unmuted.
Ken, can you talk? I can hear you, Ken. Are you in a coffee shop?
Oh, he just turned off.
He turned it off, Ken. You turned your speaker off. Now turn it on. Unmute yourself, Ken. You can do it.
There we go. Speak.
Ken, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, you got 30 seconds to tell us what you think is interesting right now in the work you're doing. 30 seconds, Ken. Go.
I am in a coffee shop that is phenomenal for getting work done. It's normally not this loud, and the music is not this loud, but there are interesting people that keep my mind active rather than falling asleep.
Ken, you work with people that live outside. What's your latest development there?
Well, I'm running into that a dominant culture thinks that they think like we think, and nothing could be further from the truth, but now I have scientific evidence for what I've always known.
Okay, thank you for sharing. It's good to see you, baby. Yeah, okay. All right, well, we're going to go. Thank you, everyone who made the call under tornado warnings. That was awesome. Sam.
You didn't get blown away. Everybody's still
April,
here.
Nobody got blown away. Jay, Connie, Rich, and Ken. It was a pleasure.
Heath is missing. Heath is missing. Maybe we lost Heath.
April, I'm going to have to, April, email everybody with your questions, entire group. And also, Elaine, I'm going to have to talk to you offline in a while because I'm going to have to go do something. All right? It was a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam left. There was a disaster.
Yeah, I came back. I missed all the homework assignment, but I'll pick it up from somebody.